Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1254 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday afternoon. And thank you for joining us, as always, on the podcast. Make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, and wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is myself and Glen Willis, once again at Peachtree Hoops. Glen has been gracious enough to join me for a lot of different episodes in the last couple of weeks, and shout out to Glen for that. Today's episode is myself and Glen talking about Bogdan Bogdanovic, talking about all of what he did last year, the future for him, his role, sort of the player capsule series continuation for us. We talked about Okongwu in recent days. We talked about John Collins and Gallinari and DeAndre Hunter and all kinds of players up and down the roster. So those are just all available in the feed right now, as well as NBA draft coverage. By the way, as I record this, the NBA draft is 16 days away. 16 days. I've talked to Andrew Kelly about the draft. I've talked to Ben Pfeiffer about the draft. I have much more coming up in the future about the draft. Ricky O'Donnell's joined me on the podcast about the draft as well. Wall-to-wall coverage coming more this week even about the draft in the near future. So please subscribe to the podcast and remember that that's coming up very soon. A big day for everyone in the league, not only the Hawks, but a lot of trades will happen in the next couple of weeks as well. So a big time of the year in the NBA circles, even with a lot of teams, of course, 28 of the 30 teams not still playing right now, but still plenty to talk about on the podcast and beyond. Okay, with that all out of the way, one more time, please subscribe to the show. And after a break for the intro, it'll be myself and Glenn talking about Bogdanovic.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am joined once again by my friend Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops, who is here to discuss with me today Bogdan Bogdanovic. Glen, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Brad. How you doing?
I'm living the dream. We're recording these, stacking them up, and you've been gracious enough to give me a bunch of time. So I'm not even sure when this is going to run, but these generally hold, barring something crazy happening in the offseason for a little while. So I do appreciate you giving me all of this time. But Bogey's an interesting guy. We'll spend this whole show on Bogey. And I feel like in some ways, he's almost the most anonymous of the quote-unquote core guys for the Hawks in some respect because, he got his money, but it was a couple years ago now. They famously just signed Herter to an extension. Hunter gets a lot of attention. Collins for obvious reasons. Capella and Okongwu, and then there's Bogey, who's just this veteran, solid player across the board in a lot of different ways, has some high upside, etc. But he'll be 30 in August. That's an interesting jumping off point for him. He's not old, but he's not the youngest guy in the world either for someone who came over to the league pretty late. I guess as we kind of always do on these, where does your mind take you when I mention Bogdanovic, and then we can sort of dive in from there?
I think just a really reliable and talented guy who can do enough things that fits well with what they need from the wing position. I feel like he's one of the elite shooters in the league. I think he takes some tough shots sometimes that sometimes affects his percentages. And that sometimes maybe people who don't watch him a lot don't realize like how many tough shots he puts up. I mean, if you ask me, like, is he one of the best 20 shooters in the league? I'm comfortable saying that. If you said 15, I'm like, okay, I'd have to sit down and make a list now, and I don't know. Yeah. But he's came to the league so experienced because all his international play. He's versatile because he can do things on the ball and off the ball. He just does a lot of advanced things that the Hawks' younger wings who are still kind of in a development phase, even if they're getting further into that kind of that trajectory, if you will. He's a guy that right now you throw him out there and I think you pretty much know what you're going to get. Any player, the shots are going to fall or not fall game to game, and things like that. But in my mind, like, he is the one wing that when he's put on the court, I feel like I know what I'm going to get from him. Hunter this year was like anybody's guess, kind of, game to game. Herter, kind of waiting for a few areas where some growth could happen. Bogey, I felt like kind of gave you the predictable Bogey, pretty reliable across the whole season, and that's pretty valuable.
For sure. I totally agree. He is very projectable in a lot of ways. One of the sort of broad pivot points or points of discussion on Bogdanovic is the fact that he's kind of worn down the last 2 years. He's had some injury stuff. The knee has been barking on him. In fact, there was a report recently that his knee is still bugging him in the offseason. Eurobasket's in danger and all this stuff. We don't really know if there's a surgery in the offing or anything like that, but his knee has been a persistent problem in the last couple of seasons. He did play only 44 games 2 years ago, did play 63 games this year, did miss a playoff game, though, was clearly not himself by the end of the year, along with a lot of other guys on the Hawks roster. So that is a question mark. He is paid like a starting caliber wing, $18 million for next year, and then $18 million player option for the year after that. So, like, it's not a situation where you're looking forward facing on Bogdanovic. He's kind of, along with Capella, those two guys are like their current, in their prime or late prime guys. Gallo's obviously post prime at this point, and Trey, of course, is on another trajectory going up. But Capella and Bogey are kind of the guys who are just already there, and you know what they're going to get out of those guys for the most part. They are good players, but I think Bogey has been a topic of conversation in terms of the trade market, all that stuff, just because he has just kind of been around for a while. And I forgot this even, so I looked it up today when we were talking before we started talking. He was drafted in 2014. He didn't come over until 2017, 2018, as a lot of guys don't. But he spent an extra 3 seasons overseas before he came over, despite being drafted in the first round by the Kings, and then kind of languished there. But a lot to sort of break down about him, but we can start on offense because you kind of talked about his shooting. That is a real clear strength of his, perhaps his number one strength at this point in time. He's kind of always been an underrated playmaker to me, dating back to the Kings, but not a guy who's going to be a primary, just kind of a solid enough guy, passes the ball, handles the ball a little bit well. But as a shooter, he's made a jump. I will say, we can go from here. It does feel like the second half in particular, but really all of 2 seasons ago was probably the outlier season when he shot 44% from 3 and just kind of went crazy in a way that we did kind of warn people was not necessarily going to be repeatable. And he went back down to 37% this year. But as you said, that 37% from 3 comes on a difficult shot diet. So he's a really, really good shooter. You could certainly argue he's still their best shooter. Herter and Trey obviously have different strengths as well, but he is on the short list of their best shooters. Where else do we go about his offense? Just because like his efficiency was down this year, but his rebounding was up a little bit. Assists were kind of flat. Did you see sort of the same player this year? Just a few less shots going in, or was there any drop off for you? What did you kind of see on offense?
Yeah, I thought what was mostly different this year was he was, especially later in the season, he was more aggressive driving the basketball. And, I think when we're being smart, what we'll sometimes do is go see if the stats kind of match what we thought we were seeing kind of with our eyes. And he averaged on drives 1.14 points per shooting possession, which is a great result there, and had 54 assists on those drives and a pretty low turnover rate. So I've been talking a lot, even some with you, about how the Hawks need wings that are more capable drivers. And I felt like, that's not what you think of when you think of Bogey, in terms of like what his strengths are, but he somehow kind of gave them more of that this year in the absence of Hunter being really any good at it. And then Herter, the things that always holds him back is kind of the contact and the free throw rate and all that sort of stuff. So just his aggressiveness was a differentiator this year. And when I think about his aggressiveness, I think back to the prior season. Like there were several playoff games, one I remember in particular where they were dead against the Sixers, and he like single-handedly shot them back into a game that they won. And I don't think anybody else on the roster does that. He's willing to take those shots. He's willing to, shoot those with confidence, regardless of pressure and situation. And I know that as Travis Schlenk has talked about, some aggressive changes and things like that. A lot of people think, well, Bogey might be the one going out. That's where I could see that making sense in some scenarios, but one of those kind of be careful what you ask for, because he is, and he does this international play. He did this in Sacramento, even though there weren't a ton of close games there. But it just so happens that my in-laws live in Sacramento, so I saw him play a lot in his pre-Hawks era. I saw visiting down there and stuff. But yeah, just his the thing that jumps out to me is the driving he did this year, which I thought was, I don't know how repeatable that is. I felt like he's just noticed no others aren't doing it, so I've got to do what I can. And then just his willingness to take hard shots in crunch time when they're trying to play from behind, and how good he is at shooting to his normal baseline, even under pressure, in high leverage situations, is something that is critical for a team building around Trey, especially considering how much attention Trey gets, especially late in close games.
We'll have more in a moment with myself and Glenn, but first, a word from our friends at PrizePicks. If you're looking for a daily fantasy option this year, the best option possible is the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks Daily Fantasy made easy. I love it, and I know that you will too. It's so easy to use. That's part of the appeal of PrizePicks. All you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players and an over/under on their projections. Win up 10 times on the entry. It's just you get the projected numbers, which makes it very easy to do. It's just a minute or less to do an entire entry. It's just that easy and timely. PrizePicks is also safe. They have fast withdrawals from the service as well, and they have props on almost anything you can think of in the basketball world. That includes points, rebounds, assists, even steals. They have mixed sports entries as well if you're into MMA or soccer or baseball or hockey. Pair it all together to use those skills at the very same time. And for a limited time, there's a no-brainer of an offer for PrizePicks. It's exclusive for all of our users. It's actually really easy to do as well. All you have to do is use the promo code NBA. If you do that, $30 for free if your player in your first entry scores even a single point on PrizePicks. One more time, it's exclusively for Locked On fans. If you use the promo code NBA and your player scores even a single point, $50 for free on their first entry using the promo code NBA. Single point, that's all you have to have, and $50 for free if you do all those things at PrizePicks. Check it out today on the app, and all of that is all available in one place at PrizePicks. Your point about his rim pressure or, the ability to drive is a good one. He's not someone that gets all the way to the rim a lot. 15% of his shots, according to Cleaning Glass, at the rim this year. It's a very low number, but that's still higher than guys like Herter, for instance. And it really does sort of get lost sometimes, and maybe that's partially my fault. How aggressive he is in hunting his shot. He, aside from Trey, of course, he is by far their most aggressive shot hunter. Like that's part of his role, and they want him to do that. They've encouraged him to do that. I'm glad you pointed out the playoff games, and even of course, famously in that run second half of last season, when he just couldn't miss a shot. Basically, there were lots of halves or even full games where he just kind of put them on his back, and not like he was taking a step ahead of Trey, but he was the only guy on the roster kind of capable of carrying the offense for a half. Like, he's really capable of doing that if he's got it going. He's taken more than 12 threes per 100 possessions the last 3 seasons. He really does get him up quickly. He's got a good release, quick release. He can shoot it from deep, etc. He did as he did from 3 this year, take a little bit of a step back in terms of his efficiency from long 2, but he's still a really good non-rim shooter. I think it was 48% the last 2 seasons on non-rim attempts from inside 3-point line. That's a really good number. Kevin Durant shoots like in the low 50s, and that's like uber elite. Bogey is a very good shooter on the mid-range as well. Like, he's one of those guys along with Trey and Herter that like mid-range shots are sort of taboo sometimes. Those are good shots for him when he's open. Like, he's really good in that range. Efficiency wise, him being able to carry a league average or so true shooting mark with his difficulty of shots is huge. And he's also a really good catch and shoot guy. So offensively, there really is not a lot to pick apart when it comes to Bogdanovic. When he's not quite healthy and bursty enough, you can kind of see that. And of course, you do wish that he was, or someone on the roster was more aptly able to get to the rim a little bit more. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, he's been the guy, if they've had to have someone try to create without Trey, it's kind of been him by default. And also, he's comfortable enough doing it, dating back to Sacramento, Europe, etc. Where like, he's a tough nosed guy too. That's a huge thing about Bogey, is that he's a vet. He's not like a huge vocal leader, but he's one of those guys that's sort of been in the battles that a lot of these guys haven't been in.
Yeah, and the other thing I think of with him on offense too is sort of a mirror of what DeLon brings them on defense. Like, DeLon, we've talked about, makes a lot of winning plays, deflections, just always on time with his help and all that stuff. Bogey does a lot of that kind of stuff on offense that I think sometimes goes unnoticed. I have to watch a possession a second or third time sometimes to see the effect he's having. Just one example comes to mind for me is Trey's game winner in the one game they won against Miami. They got the rebound, chose to not go with a timeout. He was on the right of Trey, and I think it was DeLon that was going right corner. So the next guy down without the ball really needs to be going left corner, and he timed his cut across Trey's face to open up a space for Trey to kind of get to that runner. And I mean, without all the experience he's had in Europe and without kind of his heady style of play, I don't know that Herter makes that play. I don't know that Hunter makes that play, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just so many kind of little contributing plays, helpful plays, we might say winning plays on offense that in my mind is kind of the equivalent of what DeLon gives them on defense. And a lot of that helps Trey. When Trey's trapped, I think when Bogey's on the floor, Trey feels a little better giving the ball up because he really trusts the playmaking. He really trusts kind of Bogey stepping into space on the weak side and things like that a little bit more. And that's a big deal. In a way, I wish we could kind of give Trey some truth serum and ask him, like, how would you feel about not having Bogey there to help you on possessions like that in games where you're getting a ton of pressure, hard hedges, traps, whatever it is. I thought from the wings that he gave them the most help, gave Trey the most help kind of in that phase too. So sometimes he's off the ball and just kind of stepping into a space to occupy a defender to create some space for Trey. Other times it's what he's doing when Trey gets trapped and things like that. But there's a ton of that would be missed if he just happened to not be on this team next year.
Totally agree. And this is not a shot at anybody else, but it is very clear when you listen to Trey talk how much he trusts Bogey. That's one of those things for me. And, obviously you watch him during play, it's obvious there as well. But like he talks about Bogey a little bit differently than other guys, which is in my mind is obviously a positive thing. And he knows Bogey's been through stuff and he's willing to get shots up. He's willing to be aggressive. Bogey doesn't really ever shrink away. Like he may not have the best shooting nights sometimes, but he's not going to stop shooting. He's not shy about that stuff. He's very, very confident in himself, plays hard. And that's one of the encouraging things about him. I want to make sure I note this as well. He's also a pretty good passer for a wing. Like his assist rate is down. Actually, this last year was a career worst rate, but he's always been, and even this year, been strongly above average for a wing in terms of passing, like assist rate stuff, creation stuff. Again, not a huge like live dribble, beat your guy off the dribble kind of guy, but he's a really good passer. And for me, crucially, this is one of those Hawks themes across the board. He never turns the ball over. Like it's kind of like it's Gallo's the same way. And you sort of go player for player. You kind of realize why the Hawks never turned the ball over as a team, and they were number one in the league this year. Bogey never turns the ball over, and it's one of those little things. But for a guy that's not a great ball handler necessarily, you wouldn't think that. But he just is very safe with the ball, very rock solid across the board. And the lineup data, not to go crazy in this, but the offense was, unquestionably elite with him on the court this year. They had about a 117 offensive rating with Bogey on the floor, which would have been number one in the league by a lot, basically. And the lineup data, like the two-man lineup, it was all backed up by that. He was actually quite good with DeLon for the record, which is an interesting pairing because those guys played together a lot because they kind of had to have Bogey out there with DeLon at times, going back to what we talked about with him. And one final thing that I know I mentioned before, but I want to get your thoughts on this because it's always discussed. 2 seasons in a row, Bogey and Herter have been very good together. And it's interesting because in theory, defensively in particular, that wouldn't work great. And that's been one of the fears is like you put Trey, Herter, and Bogey out there, your defense is not going to be great. But again, the lineup data, they were plus 7.3 per 100 possessions with Herter and Bogey on the court this season. It just works for some reason. I don't know if it's because the offense is just incredible or what, but those guys seem to make it work as much as nobody seems to notice that. They do play very well together eventually.
Yeah, they do, and hopefully this is not too far afield, but I go back to the playoffs last year all over again because it was Trey, Herter, Bogey for a lot of minutes.
That was their group
in that run, and I remember like follows I was writing for Peachtree Hoops, like breaking down plays where Herter would lift into a DHO or lift into something like a DHO on the left side of the floor after Trey had given up the ball. Bogey's down on the baseline. Herter, presses the ball towards the middle. Bogey shoots out to the perimeter, and they had that synchronization down over and over and over and over. And I thought they developed a ton of chemistry during that run when it was Trey, Herter, Bogey. Now, that's not to say that that's who should be starting,
right?
No,
I wasn't
or what have you. but when basically for the last 3 quarters of the season, I don't know when it happened, but when they basically, it seemed like they asked Bogey to commit to playing off the bench, and he embraced that and was really good in that role. Maybe perhaps there was some missed opportunity to get more minutes with him and Herter on with Trey. The prioritization the prioritization treatment they give with Hunter is totally makes sense. Number 4 overall pick, a lot of investment there that has to happen. But going forward, assuming that this part of the roster is kind of still there when they come back, it's going to be really interesting to me to see how they can kind of drive for that. Because I think that Trey, Herter, Bogey chemistry was profoundly important in the run they made the prior season, and then this year I thought, down the stretch, Bogey just physically was just kind of doing all he could to even kind of make himself available to play in the end. But he still had moments. Like in that game, the game they won against Miami, he had several critical shots. They were running that action where he would sprint to the corner and Trey would drive off of his corner setup and things like that. And really no one else on the Hawks could do what Bogey was doing there. So to kind of summarize that, a ton of good chemistry with him, Trey, and Herter. That's important to kind of, I think, to kind of factor into whatever they plan they have for next season.
More to come in a moment with myself and Glenn, but first, a word from our friends at Built Bar. And if you don't love a chewy chocolate brownie, I'm not really sure why you wouldn't, but what about a caramel brownie with a caramel swirl on top? It's so very good. And what if I told you you have all of that chewy, chocolatey deliciousness plus 17 grams of protein? You're in luck, as the caramel brownie bars at Built Bar are available right now. And you have to act fast because they're actually a huge fan favorite. Forget about dessert. They're actually better than dessert. And the macros are unreal. 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, only 4 grams of sugar. I replaced a regular brownie with Built's caramel brownie bar in a heartbeat. And the best part is it's covered 100% real chocolate. Like, for real, 100% real chocolate. That's an amazing little feature of Built Bar. And with Built, you don't have to actually sacrifice taste for health. You can actually have both in one place. And all Built Bars have collagen protein, which your body can absorb more efficiently. And they provide a ton of health benefits as a result of that. And there are a million reasons why you should try Built Bars. But for now, let's just say caramel brownie will rock your world. It's not just an understatement. It's really true. And with Built, tasty is now the new healthy. Go to Built.com to get your first box of caramel brownie bars now. And Built.com has everything you possibly need, even beyond that. Use the promo code LOCK15 when you get there. 15% off on your next order with Built Bar. One more time, promo code LOCK15, 15% off at Built.com. In terms of how to make it all work, clearly I'm trying not to make these like trade discussion podcasts. It's really about the players, but it'll be really interesting to see how they handle all of it, in part because I do think, as I want to ask you this, Bogey's defense has slipped. I believe that's pretty clearly true. Maybe that's more like a foot speed thing. Maybe that's a knee thing or whatever. But I think I noticed it a lot this season at times that he's not quite the same guy defensively. Now he is, as we can get into more, he is big and physical. That's one of the things about Bogey is that he, especially for a shooting guard, is very stout, very powerful, but not the quickest guy in the world in terms of sliding, standing in front of guys, etc. Good rebounder for the most part at the two. Actually has good hands. Other than DeLon, basically, he was their most active, deflection steal guy once Reddish was gone. That's sort of a low bar to clear, to be honest. But he's someone who's like a league average or better steal rate guy for a shooting guard. But I wonder what you saw defensively, because clearly he probably isn't going to get better as he gets older. Most guys don't once they cross a certain threshold, and him being 30 with a lot of miles on his tires. And again, those European seasons are not like non-seasons. You might look at his basketball reference page and see a few, not that many games, but that's a lot of miles he had he was a pro for a long time before he came over. He's maybe not an old 30, but he's not a young 30 either, if that makes sense. So I wonder what you make of his defense overall, because the metrics didn't love it this year going through that, which I kind of agree with, to be honest with you, but I wonder what you saw.
Yeah, it was interesting. I feel like I saw the same thing. It seemed like everyone else on the team, he had trouble at the point of attack. He had trouble keeping the ball handler in front of him. Not a surprise. I mean, it's right to kind of contemplate how much of that was his athleticism kind of limitation. How much was the knee? It's hard to know. And then, I'll circle back to the defense some more. But I mean, one major thing for me is with a full off season for the first time, and heading into this third season, like how do front offices kind of change the way they project what they feel like they can get out of players, because it was pretty short off seasons the last 2 years there.
Especially last year after the run, like the Hawks, and that we didn't do a lot on that, but like the fact that the Hawks had to come off of that long run into a short off season, nobody had time, and all those guys were hurt. And obviously Bogey had that late start, which we should at least mention. Like he was one of the guys that was hurt at the beginning of the season, which is notable.
Right. And he played a ton in that run. Like he played an absolute ton there and stuff. So for me, I mean, he's a guy that I would never kind of pencil in to be one of the guys I want to have at the point of attack a lot, to have on ball, defending on ball. Where I think things kind of went better for him, and you kind of touched on it, was with the Collins injury, and then even Gallo missing some time late. When they slid Hunter to the 4, you play two guards and kind of Bogey at the 3. That when he slides up to a bigger position, I think he's better suited to hold up well there. Like you mentioned, he's strong. And when you think about like the limitation he has, like he's pretty awful kind of changing direction. He's a
Yeah.
straight, he's okay straight line,
Yep.
and things like that. And then when you think about the kind of athlete he is, and the kind of way he moves on the floor, he's a very kind of up and he's very up and down. You don't see him kind of get a wide stance and things like that. And that's just the body type that he has. It's kind of everything's kind of real center for him and stuff. And I think that's what makes it hard to kind of get his change of direction and all that sort of stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Hawks approach the roster from kind of going back to treating their 2s and 3s kind of all the same and not treating Hunter maybe as a 4, or do they build for more small lineups? Because I feel like in the small lineups he can slide up and be more helpful there and kind of unlock some of that. And then even when you have him playing at the 3, sometimes even in the down the stretch, he played some 4 on defense when it was him and Hunter would slide over to the point guard or what have you. And depending on the matchup, I think he's okay. Kind of in that kind of situation. And to your point, he's always willing to try to help rebound, even if it doesn't always go perfectly. When the Hawks, obviously are trying to get 4 rebounders on every possession, touching the paint when the ball's coming off the rim. He was like the one of the wings that was like most consistently there, showing up to help that. So, that's what I see is the Hawks have to find a way to put more defensive talent on this roster heading into the next season. And that new talent, whatever it looks like and however they get it, has to be more viable at the point of attack and defending ball handlers. Bogey is not ever going to be well suited to do that, but there are a lot of other things he can do if you have the lineup construction situated so that he's in the right role on most possessions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point overall. And, he really is more of a 3 on defense in general at this point, just because of his physicality. He's not going to be a speedy guy, and you have to play matchups with him. I actually thought he was underrated defensively when he arrived from Sacramento. I thought there was this notion out there, maybe it's just because he's a European wing or whatever, that he was a bad defender. And I think he was more like average, maybe even a little bit better than that. I think he's taken a step below average now, if I had to say, and the metrics kind of agree with that statement. But he's not terrible either. There are matchups when he's bad, like obviously you mentioned like his lack of side to side and the fact that if he's trying to guard someone quick that's a ball handler, he's probably in some trouble. But in terms of like guarding a wing, being physical, knowing where to be too, it's something that I know you and I value a lot. Like he knows how to execute. He'll be in the right place at the right time. He's not an absentee defender. Like he'll dial it in. But it's notable to me that he has slowed down a little bit there, and I wonder how much they will prioritize that and maybe evaluating his future. I don't really know what to make of that, but I don't think that it's going to get a whole lot better. Let's just say I think you kind of have to project him getting a little bit, at 30. Maybe a quarter step back every year from this point forward kind of thing. You can't expect him to bounce back too much, but the shooting does sort of, to bring it all full circle, the shooting is going to age well. He's a great shooter, and that really provides a lot of value on the court. I mean, just to put a pin in it real quickly about like his metric, I know I mentioned the metrics a few times. He was a top like 80 or 90 player in like almost all of the advanced metrics this year in the league, which may not sound like an impressive number, but when you go through the league, there's 30 teams. So if a guy is in the top 80, 90, that's a really good player. I know he's making a lot of money, but I think that he's appropriately paid. It's not like Bogey's contract is underwater. Like he's still a totally fine contract for 2 years and $36 million. That deal was controversial, I guess, at times when they made it, but I thought it was a good move when they did it in terms of like getting the value. The Kings should have matched it pretty clearly, and they didn't because they're the Kings. But I just want to say that like this is a guy who, even if you take like another half step back, he's still a starting caliber player. I know he's not. I know he wasn't starting this year, and I think it's a credit to him. I think you said that as well, that he was willing to accept that role, which made them better this year in my mind. It was the right thing to do in a lot of ways, to make sure there was some punch off the bench because they just had nothing there at times, and he willingly did that, especially after the previous year when he said on the record that he wanted to start. He didn't like coming off the bench his first year. I think he kind of realizes now what his role needs to be, which is not a 35-minute a game starter every night, but certainly a 30-minute a game, sixth man or, 4-starter or whatever you want to say is really valuable. And a lot of teams he'd start for, and he could start for the Hawks. I mean, it's not like he still probably was their best wing in a lot of different ways this year. Offensively, certainly their best wing this year. So.
Yeah, agreed. And, I think the contract is absolutely fine, especially from the context of when you're trying to lure a player away from another organization, that you pay a bit of a premium, in that scenario.
And they really didn't have to. It was kind of a nice. That's why it was kind of a nice. Even if you didn't think the Hawks needed to push their chips in, then that was the big controversy. Is like, do they need to speed up? But like contract wise, for a guy on an offer sheet to get a reasonable deal, that never happens. You have to overpay usually. They didn't have to.
Yeah, for sure. And when you think about kind of his peers in the league, like compare him to like the Joe Harris always kind of jumps out at you, right? Harris is a better athlete. There's no doubt about that. I think the average NBA fan doesn't know, and we'll see how he is after these injuries. But pre-injury,
better defender, better athlete. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, right, for sure. But then you think about like the contract that like Duncan Robinson got, right? And Bogey can do so many more things than Duncan Robinson can. And then we could kind of keep bouncing around, the league and things like that. But he measures up, I think, really, really well to the other guys who are paid kind of in that range that are in a similar kind of role where they're relied upon for their shooting and a little bit of size on defense and things like that. So I don't have any discomfort with the contract at all. As we will always say, if a really great trade opportunity kind of presents itself, everybody's on the table except Trey, and that has to be the case. But, we had the conversation when we talked about John Collins, like, don't be too casual about wishing him, into a deal. I have kind of a similar feeling about Bogey because I think he does a ton of things to help them. The word that's overused in Europe is he's a professional defender, right? And you kind of alluded that he's in the right place. He communicates, he's connected and all that sort of stuff. So, and then, from my vantage point, I just think it's really important to notice like how much Trey trusts him. And that's not nothing. So, we could go deeper on defense. Like we've talked a little bit, like, are they going to still switch a ton? And that I think that factors into how much Bogey fits what you're doing scheme-wise on defense. There's a ton to figure out later on that we'll explore that when we kind of get closer to the next season. But he can help you on defense enough, especially for what he gives on offense. I think that's the way I would kind of summarize what he brings in to the team.
Yeah, you got to put him in a position to succeed, which is basically you want to keep him away from troublesome matchups, but he can and will execute and use his strength, and he'll compete, and that's it's notable. He's not a black hole. I think even if you think he's a below average defender, which I might agree with at this point in time, individually his team stuff does help you, and there's some value in that. To the point about the trade thing, and before we can wrap this up, one of the reasons Bogey is a pretty interesting trade fodder candidate is that his contract is very movable, and it's in that mid-range where you kind of need, especially if let's just say, the Hawks are tied to, at least loosely tied to some of these like max contract guys. You might need his 18 million to get up there. Like you might need him, or, Herter's the next tail down from that in terms of like making like 13, 14, 15 million. But contracts, that's just part of the deal in the NBA for trades, is that you got a match salary, and maybe they need that $18 million. Like that came up with the Ben Simmons pursuit. You remember this last year during the season when they were talking about Ben Simmons, they kind of almost had to have Bogey in any deal for Ben Simmons because they needed the money. You had to match Ben Simmons' $35 million contract, and you need that $18 million. Right. So that's part of the calculus too, which is not necessarily the most fun thing in the world, because you have to replace what you lose there. But that's part of this too. If they make a big swing move, it doesn't have to be Bogey. But, a lot of those deals basically involve either Bogey or Herter just for money reasons.
Right. And then depending on position, Capella gets to kind of mix in the mix.
Capella or Collins or whoever else. Yeah,
exactly. Like I think it's really unlikely, but if they were trying to get in the mix for Zach LaVine, like, I don't know how you do that without Bogey being in it, And
well, yeah. So also just logistically, like, you think the Bulls probably want to get a shooting guard back or someone that can play on the wing and score.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that might make a lot. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I haven't thought about. I talked about LaVine recently on the podcast, but like that's a great point. Like, if you're the Bulls and you're trying to have the Hawks, you're not doing the Hawks a favor, but you're trying to triage by losing LaVine in this scenario. And if you can get Bogey plus something else for LaVine back, it's not the worst thing in the world for a team that's trying to win. So I don't know, interesting stuff all around. But long story short, Bogey is still a very valuable player. I think he, obviously just didn't shoot it as well this year as he did 2 years ago, which was crazy. I mean, really, I looked at the numbers again today. I'm not sure. I know it was the previous season. It is truly wild how well he shot the ball. At the end of the 2020-21 season, he shot 50% from three for like a half season in the NBA. It's just ludicrous stuff. So that run will always live on for Bogey, but more realistically was this year, and he was still a really good player. So that's all I got. I should have more to add, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, the last thought I feel like I should make on defense is that this is kind of summarizing the whole situation. You put Bogey on the court with other challenged defenders, he's going to look bad.
Yep.
So you've got to have that line of construction, right? He can be helpful and stuff like that. But if he's on with 3 negative defenders, he's not going to cover any of that up.
That's a great no. It's a great point because you can play him with Trey, and they probably need to be your 2 worst defenders when he's playing with Trey. And that I know too many times the Hawks haven't been able to do that. If you got those guys out there with Gallo, those 3 fairly combustible at that point in time. If it's just Trey and Bogey, those guys have played very well together for 2 seasons. But you kind of need to triage around those guys. And obviously Bogey is better than Trey. Don't get me wrong about on defense, but that backcourt is going to put you behind the 8 ball if you're not pretty good elsewhere.
Absolutely. Yep. So that was the last kind of thought I had there. We almost hit the 30-minute mark.
We almost did.
We're going to do it one of these days.
We can talk about anybody for 45 minutes, I think, you and I, Glenn. Well, that's all I got on this one. Glenn, please plug what you have going on in the world. I know we're recording this in late May. It'll be out whenever it's out. But please plug what you have going on. And I do thank you once again for joining me.
Yeah, always fun to talk Hawks with you and the NBA and things like that. So we're into draft prospect coverage, Peachtree Hoops. So follow that there. I'll be contributing to that as we go through. When we get close to the draft, it'll I'm sure get really noisy. The Hawks are always kind of in the noise and things like that. So we'll help cover that. And then when we get to July 1st, to kind of flip into the free agency and the moratorium hits and things like that, then we'll be there too. You can always listen to me and Kevin, who you borrowed, I think not too long ago here.
I did talk to Kevin. It was a crossover event for the ages with myself and Kevin.
Yeah. I haven't listened to that one yet, but I look forward to it. But yeah, Kevin and I, ATL and 29 podcast, try to stay on top of things over there as well. And if you're not watching on YouTube, at Willis_Glenn, can kind of catch me on Twitter for observations right now on the playoffs as they kind of roll through and things like that when we get to the finals. So excited about that. So yeah, a lot of content kind of coming out over there as well.
I do appreciate it, Glenn. I will say, even with him here, Glenn is a must follow. If you are not following Glenn already, I learn from Glenn on a regular basis. I'm not just saying that because I would say that if he wasn't here. So check out Glenn's work. Check out Peachtree Hoops. Check out ATL 29 because I listen to that podcast as well. And please subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc. We'll see you all next time.